Okay, so hello everyone. I am connected today with Harry Fryer, aka the Electric Cowboy. You have a really cool story, and I'm really looking forward to highlighting it and learning more about you. So thank you so much for joining with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, yes. So first and foremost, you are a motorcycle enthusiast, and you just completed a cross-country journey across the United States on an e-bike. Now, I know that your inspiration probably came from motorcycles. So
Uh-huh.
talk to me about your start with motorcycles and talk to me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, so obviously we didn't all start with EV. EVs are certainly a new thing, especially in our industry, and a lot of us have adopted that. But I started riding when I was about 8 years old. So I've always been into motorcycles. They were always just a hobby growing up. Started
Mhm.
with dirt bikes and then building up, getting a license and riding around. So I grew up in Switzerland. So we had a lot of space around us, a lot of backcountry roads. And so for me, that was my kind of progress, I guess, into two-wheel lifestyle. And then I moved to London and started developing custom bikes. I
Mhm.
started seeing this kind of emerging scene of custom classic motorcycles being developed. I mean, I actually started during the 60s in England. But there was a kind of a revival of it with companies emerging like Deus Ex Machina, the bike shed, and things like this. And I really took interest in this. And so I started building my own bikes.
Mhm.
It was very scrappy to begin with, but I just thought, I wasn't making any money off it. It was just like a hobby at the time. And then people would come up to me and say, "Hey, where did you get that bike?" And I was like, "I built it. Can you
Mm.
build me one?" And then
Cool.
that just kind of, yeah, that developed into more of a hobby again. It was never a full time job.
Mhm.
And then I ended up working with a company called the Bike Shed Moto Co,
Mhm.
which is like, we have one here in LA in
Yeah,
downtown.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I became an early founder and investor in the company when we opened up here in LA. So that's pretty much been my home for the past 6 years in
Okay.
London with the Bike Shed. And that's where I really honed in my kind of motorcycle mecca kind of domain with all of that. I was carrying on building bikes with them, but more working on the actual sales, aftermarket sales of custom e-bikes and working with different brands with them, kind of developing up the business. And then that kind of just spiraled on into, adopting electric bikes.
Mhm.
So at that same time, we said, EVs aren't a new thing. We've seen electric bikes around for a while.
Yeah.
Electric bicycles, I'm talking about. But companies like Super 73 and a few others like Sondos were coming out with motorcycle styled electric bikes. And that really took me. I was like, what is this thing? And the barrier entry is so low. These things don't need licenses, they don't need insurance, they don't need tax. And, you know, it sounds me it feels weird for me saying this because they're kind of like, the opposite. Like that, they're the ones who are they're the rogues, they're going against the law, and they're kind of painting a bad light on motorcyclists because they look like motorcycles and they are the outlaw. Um, but I really started taking an interest in that as well, just to see how the main thing was to try and get more people on motorcycles
Mhm.
and try and breaking down the barrier of people's perception of loud machines, fast machines, scary like parts. They don't what they do with the smell and vibration, and that can turn people off a little bit. And so I was thinking, how can we adopt an easier way for people to get more involved in motorcycling? And so that style of e-bike that kind of looks like a motorcycle is a kind of an easier adoption for people to get involved. And vice versa, people who want to step down, they don't want something, so big and clunky every day to ride around town. You can kind of, segue down to an EV, like
Okay.
an electric bicycle. Yeah, and then that kind of, I'll, can explain a little more, but that developed into the project, which is what I've just been doing.
Right. Okay. So that's a really great start. So obviously motorcycles started all of this for you and you created this really cool project that was called the Outlaw Tour. So I want to get into that and I want to know why. So you kind of touched that you kind of got involved with the EV part of it because you
Mm,
want to introduce people to two wheels. So
right.
I'm sure that that kind of started this tour. but I really want to know, why did you choose to journey across the United States? Because you're not from here. So
No, I'm English,
yeah.
and so yeah, I'm also called the Electric Cowboy. I'm a British guy with a British accent.
Yeah.
It's just like none of it makes any sense.
So
Yeah.
yeah, talk to me about that. Like, why did you choose to come across the States, and how did your experience as a motorcycle enthusiast influence your approach to this tour as a whole?
Yeah, it was very humbling. Um, only going 30 miles per hour uh, on the road, and not being able to just blast down. I was overtaken by so many motorcyclists, and
I
I was
bet.
a little envious, but I kind of had to kind of shake my head, be like, no, 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 this is about electric bikes. You
Mhm.
can ride motorcycles anytime you want. I chose America because of the Electric Cowboy theme, and also I've always it's everyone's dream to ride across America on a motorcycle. You want to do Route 66. You want to visit all the incredible towns. You want to go down to Texas and just amazing riding weather. But it's also I wanted to put a dent in the history of EV evolution
Mhm.
or EV history. And I wanted to be the first person to ride a fat tire electric bike across America.
Right. Okay.
It was a good kind of mile marker. Rather than I know this Sinjay Gottwald from Cake Electric Motorcycle. She became the first woman to ride solo and unaided on an electric motorcycle,
Mhm.
and so I can navigate Africa basically. And I was talking to her a lot about that trip, and Africa could it is a very um, good kind of point to start just because of the EV infrastructure.
Mhm.
It doesn't exist there, and so that's the challenge in itself. But I knew doing something like that on an electric bicycle was just not going to work.
Right.
And also doing the American routes, so I mapped out the routes that kind of paved the way, following on from what the original, if you would say, frontiersmen during the 1800s would and the forefathers back in the day would have taken the southern routes trying to make the western expansion. So I
Mhm.
kind of wanted to play into that a little bit with the Electric Cowboy theme, and so I kind of made that route um, that skirted all the way down to Texas and then all the way up again through Arizona, and I wanted to hit on those points, going to the saloons, going to the whiskey distilleries,
Mhm.
going into all these fun places while engaging with all the communities on the route. And so definitely that mile marker of crossing America was my goal.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
but yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's very humbling trying to navigate the roads. Not it's different from driving in a car. You're going to be going on interstates. You're going to be driving past gas stations. You're not going to see much of the culture of America. Right, doing a motorcycle, you're going to get a little bit more of that. You're more inclined to take winding roads and back routes, but you're
Mhm.
still, you're still going like 70 miles per hour.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas on an e-bike, you're forced to take routes. You can't really take interstates because they're too fast. You can't really take bicycle routes
Mhm.
because the bike's a little too heavy and with all the gear. And so you're kind of in this middle ground, the outlaw phase, I call it, hence the outlaw
Mhm.
tour, where you're forced to take you're creating your own path. And so for me, that's been a big challenge to try and find the optimum or the optimal route
Mhm.
specifically for that type of e-bike. And so I was able to just explore and visit so many different communities and towns and meet new people because I was taking these back routes because of the position they were putting me in, going over bad roads, getting flat tires,
Mhm.
and then ended up staying with people. And so traveling across America on something like this is definitely eye-opening. I wouldn't say it's better than than a motorcycle. You can definitely go further with a motorcycle, but if it's the culture you want to explore and you just want to see something different and kind of put yourself out there a little bit, you're a little bit more vulnerable and
Mhm.
you're subject to like wall plugs, which are the outlets, like 110 outlets. They were my best friend on the trip. Um, and so you're not looking for gas stations because it's not gas you're looking for cafes, you're looking for homes, you're looking for, you know, anywhere that basically has electricity. And so
Okay.
you're forced to think a little differently, especially, on an electric bike.
Okay, so you say that, and I wanted to ask, I'm sure you had a route and plan that you wanted to take or needed to take, but was there anything that you had to change while you're on the road because you realized, shit, that's not going to work?
Yeah, yeah. Well, very early on, I started with two batteries
Okay.
for the bike, which normally is definitely enough. You know, most guys having these bikes only have, only use one battery because that's just enough to get them around the city.
Mhm.
Because these bikes are made for the city, they're not made for going across America, and so I slightly had to adapt and modify the bike according
Right.
to that brief. So I started off with two batteries, but then I quickly realized getting over the Appalachian Mountains and Blue Earth Mountains through West Virginia was just not going to work.
Mhm.
You know, I set out to do 100 miles a day minimum, and I was only getting 50.
Okay.
And that's not, putting down the bike's capability or charging capability. That's purely just the terrain, the elevation, the wind, the weight, all of these other factors came into play. That kind of pushed down the mileage a little bit. And so I had to adjust mainly just the time frame. So the route kind of stayed the same, but the time frame changed. But also I mapped out that I was going to do cycle routes pretty much the whole way. That's
Mhm.
what I did my map. And then, as I mentioned before, like I very quickly realized, okay, these cycle routes are taking me through like tiny, like bollard streets, behind people's houses, and I'm there with like a big helmet, all this gear. Like I look like a motorcycle, and the bike handles a little bit more like that. And so I had to fully readjust. Like the cities and the towns, so I mapped out every single 100 miles, and then every 50 miles of that, I kind of plan to charge. So that stayed the same. The route to get to those places did change.
Okay. Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so I want to know, so you obviously came across lots of ups and downs with this journey. You had to figure things out, alter a lot of things, be adaptable, all of that sort of stuff. And I think most people on any road trip kind of realize that too. Something goes,
Mm,
you plan something and it never goes to plan, but that makes
right.
the best journey of it all. So this whole journey, this whole tour is a testament of human, just like a human spirit of adventure. So I want to know, what is the most profound moment during this whole time that you just kind of said, wow, I didn't realize that about myself, but now I know. And how did you gain that experience from that moment?
Well, I gotta tell you something that hasn't actually been, I mean, people now know, but I haven't released it on social media or anything like that. Is my bike and all the gear and everything got stolen in New Mexico,
Oh no.
in Las Cruces. So right on the, on the edge of on the Mexican border there. Throughout the journey, I've encountered, the kindest people, the humility and humanity of people who just, stop on the side of the road to help you, or even though you're not in trouble, they're wondering what the bike is, or they think you're out of gas because you're pedaling. And I've stayed in people's homes who've helped me after I've had a flat tire. They've taken me in for like 4 days, and that has been a real testament to people's, uh, you know, kind of approachability to the unknown, to just stranger in a country. But I think once they realized I was just a random British guy riding across America doing this tour, they were slightly more approachable. Um, but in El Paso, I had my whole bike stolen with all my gear. So it was right outside of Cracker Barrel. I had my passport in it. I had a whole bunch of filming equipment inside in the bike. It was all strapped to the outside, and it was pretty much my life,
Yeah.
traveling on two wheels. And so for a good 3 hours, I had lost the bike. I'd contacted the police. I got CCTV footage from the restaurant where it was taken from, and we tried our hardest. And the police didn't find anything. Um, I eventually came across a guy on the side of the road having his car fixed at this dealership, and I asked him and I said, "Hey, so I don't know how long you've been here, but I'm looking for a guy by this description, carrying a bike like this. Like I think he's been wheeling it with a dog." And he's like, "Dude, I literally just saw that guy 15 minutes ago down that street." I couldn't believe it. I was like, "What are the chances?" This one guy I asked, it must be 5 miles from where I was, and so I follow his tip and I go find that street. Couldn't see anything. He pulls up next to me about 10 minutes later in his car, and he's like, "Hey, did you see anything?" I'm like, "No," and he's like, "Hop in the car, I'll help you." So he takes out like an hour and a half of his day to drive around Las Cruces, looking for my e-bike. I couldn't find it at this point, and he says, "Dude, I'm sorry, I have to head home to my wife, but I tell you what, I have an e-bike myself. Why don't you use that to go find yours?" He said, "You probably have a better chance to find your e-bike than going places a car can't go." And even, on top of everything else, I was like, "This is incredible." He's willing to lend me his bike. I've only just met the guy. But I guess he could sense, I was good natured and there was something, this was bigger than just me. This was a larger project. So we went back to his house and I gave him like an idea as collateral. I took his e-bike and I went back into town. It must have only been about 30 minutes of me searching along the Rio Grande and going up underneath bridges and through various different industrial estates. I saw my bike being ridden by some guy just in front of a motel, a rundown motel. And I chase him down and he eventually falls off the bike. He tries to take a corner and he falls off and I managed to take my bike back.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, there was a bit of a longer story involved in that, but I'll talk more in depth on that actually on the documentary piece I'm doing. But I eventually, chase this guy down, get my bike back. I call the police, they come, they get involved. But all the rest of my gear is still in this like rundown RV park behind the motel. So I've got my bike and the police are there. They're like, "Well, this is a win. You've got your bike, you got your bike back," which is my most important thing. I'm like, no. I don't have my passport. I don't have my clothes. I don't like all these things, and they're like, "Well, sorry, you're just going to have to, take it as it is, I wouldn't go in there if I was you. We've just arrested a guy I know this morning, blah, blah, blah." So I was kind of at a lost end. And I was like, "Well, if the police aren't going in there, like, what can I do?" And I just could not leave the place. I was like, I have to, I can't leave not knowing that my things are there and then I'm, going to leave them behind. So I went in around there and to the RV park and I started knocking on doors saying, probably the most British accent ever, like, "Hello." I think they were just confused as I was. Yeah, that was Mary Poppins doing. And so I just started speaking to people and, just trying to get them to understand the situation, telling them, "Look, I'm not the police," because they saw me with all the police. And I was like, "Look, I'm not the police. I'm just trying to recover my things. You probably, you don't know what to do with them. I'm not saying you stole them, but I think you might know who did. Listen, I'll offer you a reward." Blah, 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 blah. And so I was kind of, calming down. I got a few of them involved and said, "Listen, I'll come back in 2 hours' time. And if you find my things, I will give you X amount." And after doing this, for a few different guys, I came back 2 hours later, and sure enough, they had a bag, with my things. Not everything, like a lot of things they couldn't find. Someone else's. I noticed a few of them were wearing like my baseball cap, like my sunglasses. Yeah, I'm like, dude,
Wow.
I had to try and like calm myself and not be like, "Give me that back," because I wasn't really in a position to fight these guys. But I managed to kind of, negotiate with them and tell them my story. And by the end of it, after getting, my things and my passport back, thankfully, they became really invested in my story. They became really intrigued about what I was doing, like, how I was traveling across America. These weren't actually the guys who stole the bike. The guy who actually took it just dumped it there. And so they just were like, "Oh, I'll have this." So once they kind of understood, they were like, "Oh, well, we're really sorry, what's happened." Like, obviously they're from, different walks of life and, and bad upbringings or different upbringings. But that was for me, that was fantastic. I never would have thought I'd be in that position from when I woke up that morning, having, trying to negotiate with, a homeless camp in Las Cruces to get my passport and things back, but also the way they were very aggressive and standoffish to begin with, as they were. Who's this guy coming in, asking questions, knocking on doors? And then just from, how you put yourself across and how you perceive yourself across, they just immediately changed their temperament. They became a lot calmer, a lot more understanding, a lot more friendly. They were starting to joke around. And I walked out of there just with my mind blown, like, what just happened? Like, I just forcefully went in there, got my things, got my bike. And now these guys, I've got a few of their numbers from like trying to get my things back. And I think some of them still text me. I'm like, "How do you have phones?"
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just bizarre. Like you never put yourself in that position until you're in desperate kind of measures as part of like, so what do you do? Do you just leave and you go home and that's it, or do you go back in? And for me, I couldn't perceive not finishing this challenge.
Right.
I call him my brother, and he's like, dude, it's just a bike ride. Leave it alone. Do not do that. I'm like, no, I'm going in. I need to get my things. This is bigger than just me. But yeah, that was an amazing sense of kind of a personal development. You never know how you're going to interact with people in a way until you're forced into a position like that.
Yeah.
So I've definitely learned a lot about myself in that respect. Slightly more humble as well. Like I walked out of there with slightly, restored faith in humanity, because also the disparity between the guy who helped me, who ultimately actually said that he came down to get his bike and my bike, and he said, "Listen, you're not staying in a hotel tonight. You're going to stay with my wife and I in our house." They cooked me dinner and they gave me clothes because I had nothing. And then they sent me on my way the next day. And so the complete opposite of, the extreme of having your bike taken, having to go, to extreme lengths to recover it, to, someone you just only met who lent you his bike and is now, taking you into his home and introducing you, to his family. And so all of those things, I mean, it's definitely a restored faith in humanity, but also a kind of a deeper understanding into, America as a whole, and it's not all what people perceive. You can think of Southern hospitality. You're not going to find this in LA. Sadly, you're not going to find it in New York. You're not going to find it in cities. It's places, like where you can have the complete opposite ends of, poverty and generosity.
I really love that perspective of, what you were in a really bad situation and you really tried to make the most of it. And I'm not surprised hearing how you went about it, because given this tour that you did, it doesn't, like, not everyone would do this. So of course you're going to have that grit. You're not going to give up. I need my things. And you learn so much about yourself, which is, I think that's a really, really inspiring story, because most people probably would give up or would be too scared to go to these people. But you came across as polite, you were nice, even though you were probably furious on the inside, and you ended up what you needed and wanted. And these people gave you their phone number and you're talking to them now. Like, that's just such a random, outlandish story, but now you're here, you completed your journey. So, and it changed your perspective on American people, the culture.
100%.
And I think that's a really great takeaway. And it hasn't like tarnished you in any way. I mean, it just gave you an incredible story, which is awesome. So I'm glad
Yeah, I mean,
that resulted in like a positive outcome.
Well, it is a positive. After, okay, like I did lose a lot of things, and one of the annoying things I did lose was a hard drive, big hard drive with a lot of the footage and content from the trip, which is really sad. I mean, everything, things can be reshot, but certain things like that, maybe it was never supposed to be out there anyway, But ultimately, it was a positive. Not just the physical aspect of retrieving my things, but the positive of, the people who helped me, who don't know me, who didn't, who had no obligation to help me at all, but they took the time out of their day to do so. But also just, a deeper understanding into, human psychology and people as a whole. And it's not always what you think.
Yeah, and you said you had learned so much about yourself, and I think
100%.
At the end of the day, you want personal development. You only want to get better, and I'm sure you learned how to talk to people in a different way that you never had to before. And like, that's just another in-depth to your personality. And you can probably take that to your business now, or
right. Yeah.
And of course you're British.
Negotiation talks 101. Yeah.
That's right. And you're British. So British have that stereotype of being extra polite. So I'm sure that really helps you in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it was the British thing. They were like, can we just get this guy, like, get him away?
Yeah.
He's scaring us. Yeah. No, I mean, but that was definitely an extraordinary moment. That was the kind of the culmination. I mean, like I said, I've come across some extraordinary people on the way who've helped me out. One guy who stopped on the road after I was pushing the bike for a while, and he ended up owning a school bus repair shop just in the local town. And he had all the gear and all the equipment, and he helped me out and said, use whatever you want while you're here. So I fixed the bike. And at the end, he said, I don't know if you're religious or not. Would you like me? Can I say a prayer for you? And really sweetly put his hands on my shoulder, and he's a man called Dustin Self,
Mhm.
and he put his hands on my shoulder and he said, said a prayer like, "Dear Lord, like we bless Harry on his way. We hope that he doesn't get too many flat tires, all this stuff." And I thought that's just really sweet. It doesn't matter if I'm religious or not, which I am, but I thought that was just, it was more than just that. It was just a general, you know, understanding and appreciation for, I guess someone doing something like this, but ultimately, him helping me out in a way that, you know, he didn't need to at all.
Yeah.
And I think the most common thing they all say is when I ask them, like, "That's so kind, but like, why did you help me?" They say, "Well, I would have wanted someone to do that for me."
Hmm.
And they all say that, right? And it's kind of like a pay it forward. And so I'm now constantly thinking, like, okay, like, who can I help now? Like, what am I gonna, and then that person can ultimately help the next guy. But that's happened many times throughout. But every time those scenarios have happened is because I've been in a position where I've opened myself to meet these people. I'm not closed off because when you're all fine and good and you're riding on the road, you've got like you're set in your mind. You've got your mission. You've got your goal and your destination, and that's all you're focusing on. And you slightly like lower your radar is when you're in like a vulnerable position. You're from the side of the road. You can open yourself up, like I guess you naturally do, to being more open, to people, and it's kind of you've got no other option but to, ask around and speak to people, and it's interesting to see, you can do that any day of your life, but no one does, because no one wants to make themselves feel like they're vulnerable or they need things, or that they're in that spot.
Yeah.
But you don't care what people think. That's one of the main things. I just stopped caring what people think at one point. I'm just some random British guy. No one is going to remember me tomorrow. So
Well, that's why you're on the outlaw tour, right? You just don't give a fuck and you got to keep going.
well, I don't want that to be the main thing. Outlaw tour, Harry Fry doesn't give a fuck. But it's definitely outlawish and cowboy nature.
Well, that's why you came to the States and you did that. So I would love to know, do you have any more plans of traveling across the United States, perhaps on a motorcycle?
I definitely want to do a motorcycle. What I actually have planned with a friend of mine is what we want to do is one of the things I had on this bike is a 360 camera. And so I was constantly filming everything. I want to do almost just like a 11-day trip from either, I think, from New York to LA again, but on a motorcycle, and just have a consistent feed of 360 footage from the back of the bike. So two bikes.
Like live footage? I guess you have to have good reception, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you'd have two satellite phones connected up, and then you'd have these cameras linked up to like an external battery. There may be like a, whatever 10-minute gap where you have to swap out memory cards and things like that. But the idea is just people can chime in and just watch you for 11 days straight riding from New York to LA. But that's just like a interesting side project I picked up as a friend of mine in Nashville while I was on the route. But the next thing from this is the documentary that I'm producing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's more to do with riding across, the people you're meeting, these stories, these experiences. But I would definitely like to do something again on a motorcycle or on an electric motorcycle. Okay. Again, to push the boundaries of EV, which is everyone wants to ride across America on a motorcycle. It's it's the most fun thing, but might not be the most fun thing to watch, because usually things go perfect. Not perfect, but on an EV bike, there's always things that's going to go wrong. It's early days with it.
You know that quite well, and that should be fun. So we're Russ Brown motorcycle attorneys. We help people when they get into an accident. So have you ever been into a motorcycle accident? And if so, what did you learn from it?
I learned my insurance company didn't do anything. I learned I probably shouldn't have made the claim in the first place, because it had an effect on my later bike insurance. But the main thing, I've become a much more aware rider, and like you say, people always say, most of the time these accidents happen 5 minutes from your house, right? And this happened 2 minutes from my house in London. I was on my first custom bike that I built. It was a 1978 Honda CB554. So it was a beautiful classic cafe racer, over 40 years old. And this thing was, all metal, had like no plastic pieces. It was low center of gravity, but a heavy bike. And I was shooting off to the bike shed to work. And it was a Saturday morning early, and it just happened to be one other car on the road, and this was his grey pickup. And he didn't really know where he was going, and he suddenly just pulled a left onto a side street. It was very quiet. He probably didn't see anyone around. My bike was very loud, nonetheless. Anyway, I was on the inside because he looked like he was taking a right, but he turned right to go pull in left, and I just hit the front of him. And he drove off, so I never saw him. It was just like a hit. Yeah, never got his plate, nothing. I looked on CCTV footage and everything. And for me, that just became a write-off. Luckily, I managed, the bike wasn't too badly damaged. It wasn't a write-off. I had to get new forks, new headlight, and new tires, but that was it. And just like a dent in the tank. So luckily, and I was fine miraculously.
Okay.
I just had like a cut on my ankle that was like, down to the bone, but it could have been much, much worse. But yeah, the main thing is just that's helped my general hazard perception.
Yes.
And perception of car drivers. Now I never trust indicators, even though someone's indicating right or left. Like I never they could have left it on, or they don't know.
I have no trust. I have no trust that way, and I'm always looking. So yeah, I get that.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's had a major impact on me, and has actually helped on this tour and trip while I'm riding. Is that you've got to be extremely perceptive and aware just of other riders, because no matter how good a rider you are, it's just you can be someone like that, but you can be a better rider by just being more cautious and understanding that people in other cars aren't always going to do what they say.
That's a very, very sad story that the guy drove off, unfortunately. But I mean, I think your hyper awareness and being extra cautious on the road, like you said, helped you even on your tour. And I think a lot of motorcyclists can agree. You can kind of take that to your driving too, just being hyper aware of your surroundings. And we're just extra cautious of everything. And I think that's the best way to be a good driver and a rider, which more people should ride motorcycles for that reason, so you can become a better driver.
100%. Like, yeah, but when I drive a car, I'm super aware of like when I'm indicating what I'm doing, how I'm positioning myself, because I know the guy behind me is watching every move that I'm doing, and he's making, he's changing lanes and deciding what he's doing based on what I'm doing. And so absolutely, I mean, there should be like a crash course in just like motorcycle hazard perception and awareness, just so they can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's good that you're a good driver too.
Well, I like to think.
To segue to my last question. So you mentioned earlier you are an investor with the Bike Shed in London. Yep. And you involve yourself a lot there. So I'd love to hear about, because your ending point was in LA at the Bike Shed. So you started from made it all the way to LA to the Bike Shed. And I believe there's only 2 locations, right, in the world, London and LA. So talk to me about the differences with the LA one to the London one, and what is the American biker culture? What are some things you love about it that you've seen just from being in LA and coming to the Bike Shed and seeing it all?
Yeah, it is different. It's the same, but it's different. I mean, Bike Shed was founded on community, so wherever we are, we're gonna develop that. London became known as the kind of all-inclusive spot for motorcyclists, because up until then, you'd have certain bars and certain spots where you just have your Harley riders, you just have your sports bike riders, you just have your dirt bike riders, right? And then the ATV crowd. And there wasn't one spot that seemed to be, not that the venue weren't picking that. It just seemed to be the clientele would just kind of overrun. And then if you were on another style of bike, you'd feel you couldn't really fit in. The Bike Shed really honed in and developed and made sure that there was no specific one rider, or like one type of, you could be a new rider, experienced rider on whatever kind of style bike you have. And so when we brought this over to LA, immediately the Harley crew came in and were like, this is going to be our new home. Mm-hmm. And we had to kind of, when I say Harley crew, like specific chapters and specific groups, like well-known organizations, were like, this is going to be our new clubhouse. And we were like, I'm sorry, this doesn't work like that. You're going to have to take your vest off and you can't, we don't, like, this is a family, destination. It's a family run restaurant. We don't want to have any kind of affiliation really with that. And slowly, bit by bit, I think our the customer base and the community understand that it's just a safe space for everyone where you can go, you can hang out just with one common kind of appreciation for motorcycles.
Okay.
So that we really wanted to maintain and bring across. But the venues themselves, they look a little different. I mean, our LA one is 3 times the size of our London one.
Okay.
Yeah, and it looks a little like our London one is built into railway arches. It's very London-esque. It's very, East London. It's like kind of hidden away and has its own little private driveway to get in, and it's very cozy and has a lot of charm to it. The LA one, it's still new, but it's big. We got a big car park area, which is mainly for motorcycles. We have like a big event space area, big restaurant, and then it's got all our other facilities like tattoo parlor, barbershop, retail shop, and then like a private members lounge, which the London one doesn't have. So we're also a members club, and so that's really like reinforced people's association with the club as well. To get more involved. Like you don't need to be a member to go,
okay.
but it gives you that extra kind of association plus all the perks that come with being a member with Bike Shed. But it's interesting to see it develop. Like when we first moved in, it's we didn't have the easiest time with some motorcycle groups, to say the least.
Okay, well, I'm sure everything's a learning curve, so I'm sure it's like you said, it's changed now. It's more of an inclusive
absolutely,
which is great. So that was the end off of your journey, and it sounds like you have a lot more going on in the future in the States, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You are and also being in California, you are in the mecca of the motorcycle world, so it's a good place to end off for you.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it had to be. Yeah,
it had to be, of course. So to kind of end off here, what is just a piece of advice you would just give anyone from just kind of what you learned from this journey, and just some words of wisdom to just let us off on?
Yeah, because I dig in deep. I mean, ultimately, obviously there's so many things I learned about myself along the road, but the most important thing was that I set out with a plan and a goal, mm-hmm. with basically at zero. Mm-hmm. And I managed to build up the main thing for me was, okay, like, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do this on? And how am I going to pay for this? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of built up a whole project around it and got investors involved. And the number one thing is I just had so much belief in the project. Mm-hmm. And there was just never a question of, if. It was like when or how. Like that was it. I knew I was going to do it. It was just how I was going to do it. It was very scrappy to begin with. And I think the key thing, it doesn't need to be, all like perfect and shiny chrome in the beginning. It eventually got there. Mm-hmm. Once more people started to realize, once I, got more and more brands involved. But I just set out, I was like, this is going to happen. There's no way this is not going to happen. So which is when like my bike, when the bike was taken, I was like, I've got this far. There's no way I'm not going to run. I'm going to, fight, do the nail, to get this back. And so I guess the number one piece to take away from there is just having just an unquestionable belief in that what you want to do is you're going to do it, and don't think too hard about the if or the how. It's just just when. Yeah.
Figure it out and keep going. And believing.
There's no right or wrong. Like I got it.
That belief in themselves, so then they believe that they lack it all. So just keep believing. I really like that.
Yeah. Like I said, that people would ask like, oh, like, are you scared doing this? Yeah, I was scared, but I also just, I don't know, maybe I was a little naive. I think I wasn't questioning too many things. I just
that's the best way.
Naive,
just a little bit.
I didn't want to. It's just a little bit naive, because then you kind of push away your doubts, and I had no doubts.
Mhm.
going into it, which again, it could be naive, but it's like ultimately I finished. so,
Exactly.
so for me, that's like take it, okay, well that worked, and that's really helped.
Well, I really like that advice. And I think, yeah, a lot of people could use that in their day-to-day life to accomplish anything or, whatever it may be. Just be a little naive, keep believing, and you'll get there if you really want to.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, Harry, thank you so much for taking the time to connect with me today. I loved hearing your story, and it's very, very inspirational. Can't say I'm going to do it on a bicycle, but I'll do it on my motorcycle one day. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Definitely take your advice and just your enthusiasm and your grit, and take it with me on my next journey. So I really appreciate your time today.
Well, of course. Well, I'm glad I could inspire that. I appreciate it, Olivia. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye.